Hello there. I'm Les the Artist. Welcome back. It's been some time. Almost everyone at some point is afraid of the dark. Have you ever felt like something was watching you from the shadows or hiding under your bed? Perhaps you had good reason to fear. Tavo caught a glimpse of something hiding in the shadows when he was a young boy. Years later, he would have to save a loved one from it. Tonight's tale is called El Cucuy. Gustavo grew up in a Mexican-American family, living in a predominantly Latinx neighborhood. His friends and family called him Tavo, which he adopted as his preferred name. He grew up hearing all the same stories that his cousins and friends did, but there was one old folktale in particular that always stood out to him, and with good reason. Tavo had once seen El Cucuy. El Cucuy was an old folktale that had been told for generations by parents to scare their children into behaving properly. El Cucuy was the twisted spirit of a father who had lost his children to his own mistakes. He roamed the shadows, abducting children, hoping to find his own, and consuming the ones he discovered were not his once he had taken them. Most people grew out of the fear and conclude that El Cucuy is just a boogeyman that doesn't exist. When Tavo was 9 years old, he was attending a backyard sleepover for a friend and a classmate's birthday. On the day the sleepover was scheduled, it began to rain around mid-afternoon, and the rain would end up lasting all weekend. Even though all the young boys in attendance attempted to persuade the birthday boy's parents to allow them to camp out in the rain in their tents, the sleepover was moved into the birthday boy's bedroom. Although the boys attempted to stay up as late as possible, one by one they tired and fell asleep. Soon Tavo was the only one still awake, and he was fading as well. That was when the closet door began to open. Tavo was laying in his sleeping bag, facing the closet door. He was the furthest one from the closet, the way the boys were laid out on the floor or on the birthday boy's bed. In a half-asleep daze, Tavo watched as the handle on the closet door turned, and the door slowly creaked open. Tavo was now fully awake again, but he kept his eyes squinted because he thought one of his friends was playing a prank and wanted to catch them in the act. The door stopped when it was only a little bit open, and nothing happened for a moment. Tavo tried to look around the room without moving to see if he could identify which of his friends had snuck out of their sleeping bag and was messing around with the closet door. That's when Tavo realized that everyone else was still in their bags and asleep. Mischievous thoughts quickly turned to anxiety as Tavo looked back at the closet door, and anxiety turned to fear when a set of long, slender fingers poked out of the door. The hand reached out of the closet and gripped the door. Tavo unintentionally held his breath and froze. A face then peeked out of the closet as another hand reached out and also gripped the door. The face did not look entirely human. It was large and long, with a wide mouth and black eyes. The face peeked its entire head out of the closet door and began to scan the room. Gustavo was no longer holding his breath. He began to pant in fear and was on the verge of hyperventilation. As the face scanned the room, it stopped and focused on one of the sleeping boys. It smiled as if it had identified the boy. Its smile was huge and revealed a mouthful of jagged and broken teeth. That was when Tavo realized what he was seeing. It was El Cucuy. Tavo screamed, and the creature switched its focus to him for a split second, and then it disappeared back into the closet. The rest of the boys awoke startled and confused. One of them asked Tavo what was wrong, and he told them El Cucuy was in the closet. The rest of the boys quickly jumped to their feet, and the birthday boy slowly walked over to the closet, which was still ajar. The rest of the boys fell in behind the birthday boy as he slowly opened the closet door. When the door was completely open, the birthday boy then slowly reached over to the switch that turned on the closet light, and just as he flipped the light on, his father quickly opened the bedroom door, scaring all the boys into a unified scream and jump. The father asked the boys what was going on, and they all looked toward the closet. The birthday boy told his father that Tavo had seen a Cucuy coming out of the closet. The boy's father walked over to the closet and looked inside. He moved around hanging clothing to show the boys there was nothing there, and then he asked Tavo if he was playing a prank on everyone. Tavo shook his head no, and then described what he saw to his friend's father. The father told him that everyone knows what a Cucuy looks like, and that everyone also knows that a Cucuy is not real. He told Tavo that it wasn't nice to scare everyone, and that he shouldn't play such mean tricks. Tavo insisted that he was telling the truth, but to no avail. The father told the boys to go back to sleep, and that if they were afraid of the closet, to leave the door cracked with the light on. The father exited the room and closed the bedroom door behind him. The boys all looked at Tavo and appeared annoyed. The birthday boy then walked over to the closet, turned off the light, and closed the door. The boys all then climbed back into their sleeping bags while making jokes about Tavo being afraid. The other boys all went back to sleep that night, but Tavo laid awake, watching the closet door all night. The next morning, the boys all awoke to the birthday boy's mother opening the bedroom door to declare it was time for breakfast. The mother made sure all the boys were fed and that they all got cleaned up and dressed so their parents could pick them up. When Tavo's parents arrived to pick him up, the birthday boy's parents took them aside and told them about the previous night's incident. On the way home, Tavo's parents reassured him that El Cucuy was not real, and they apologized to him for telling them the story when he was younger. They explained that they didn't know it would scare him as much as it did. Tavo tried to tell him that originally the story didn't scare him as much as they thought, but that he really saw what he was describing. His parents, of course, did not believe him and told him that he was imagining it because he was attempting to sleep in an unfamiliar place. A few days later, when Tavo arrived at school, his friends began teasing him and telling other classmates about the incident. Children pointed and giggled at him, and a group of girls on the playground began a chant of, "El Cucuy is gonna get you." When the bell rang and all the students reported to class, Tavo and his friends realized that one of them was missing from school. Their teacher, principal, and one of the school counselors were all in the classroom when the children filed in, but the children had failed to notice that as well. The teacher asked the children to take their seats and quiet down as the principal had something very important to tell them. The children all sat, and after a few moments they quieted down and focused attention on the principal. The principal began addressing the class by saying that he had personally spoken to all of their parents that morning, and that he had been given permission by them to talk about what he was about to tell them. He told them that one of their classmates was reported missing over the weekend by his parents. The principal went on to urge the children that if any of them knew where he may have gone, or who he may have gone with, to tell him, the teacher, or the counselor, so they could forward the information to the police. He further explained that if any of them felt afraid, nervous, or any other way about the situation, the counselor was also available to help them. The boys in the classroom, who were at the birthday party, all looked at the empty desk that sat in the middle of the room. The desk belonged to their friend, Javier, who had also attended the party. Javier was the boy that had made the face in the closet smile. The next few days of school went on as normal despite the fact that Javier's desk remained unoccupied. Tavo's parents watched the news every night for updates on the story. Flyers with Javier's pictures on them hung all over the neighborhood. Emails from the local police went out to everyone in the area. Javier's parents remained hopeful, but as time went on, everyone in the neighborhood began to expect the worst. Unfortunately, the worst is what happened. One evening, Tavo's parents were watching the local news on television when they announced a breaking story. The two anchors reported that the remains of a young boy were found in an alley by a transient. The anchors sent the story to a journalist who was on the scene at the discovery. The journalist reported that just a few hours before, a transient walking through an alley had discovered what he originally thought was a dead animal. Upon further examination, the transient was shocked to find that it was actually what was left of a young boy. The coroner was taking the remains in to determine identity and cause of death. It was suspected that the remains could belong to Javier. The next morning, Tavo's parents received a phone call from his school stating there would be no classes that day. It had been confirmed that the remains found the day before were Javier's. School would resume the following week, allowing parents to console their children and to explain to them that their classmate would not be returning. An investigation took place, and the transient, who had been reported as discovering the body, was convicted of Javier's murder and sent to prison. Nine years passed, and several years without Tavo thinking about Javier. He was to graduate from high school soon. His plan was to attend community college for prerequisite classes, and then transfer to the university to study psychology. A choice that was subconsciously inspired by those events years before. Most of the other boys that attended the party had either moved away or gone to different high schools than Tavo. One of them suffered a fate similar to Javier's recently, when he was murdered by a serial killer who'd gone on a rampage through a mobile home park. Tavo was still close with one of the boys, though, his best friend, Daniel. Daniel, unfortunately, came from a broken home. His parents were divorced, and Daniel and his younger sister, Teresa, were split apart as well. Daniel lived with their mother and her fiancé, while Teresa lived with her father and his wife. Daniel and Teresa also had a newborn half-brother, Michael, from their father's remarriage. Daniel's life with his mother was tumultuous, and they lived in poverty, but they got by. Teresa was not so lucky, as she tended to be treated like an outsider in her own home, and often got ignored. Things had gotten worse for her since Michael was born, and now he received all the attention. Daniel did his best to make sure he saw his sister on a regular basis, and Tavo was often with him, and also treated Teresa like a little sister. Tavo and Daniel were in the same class to start the school day, world literature. One day, when the two met up at school, Tavo noticed that Daniel seemed troubled. When he asked him if everything was okay, Daniel responded that he was worried about Teresa. He told Tavo that she had gotten into trouble the day before in school for falling asleep in class. She had also been in trouble a few times for causing disturbances in class and fighting on the playground. He had gone over to their father's to check on her and ended up spending the night on the floor of his sister's bedroom. He said she told him that she was also afraid to go to bed the night before, and even threw a tantrum about it. Daniel told Tavo that he asked her why she was afraid, and she said that for several nights she had woken to see the closet door opening itself, and was hearing noises coming from under the bed. Daniel said that he had tried to assure her that it was just her imagination, but nothing made her feel better. As the two walked to class, and Daniel continued talking about Teresa, Tavo's thoughts wandered back into time, to the night of the sleepover. He had almost forgotten what he had seen that night, or at least, he thought he had. The two entered their classroom and took their seats along with the other students. The teacher was standing at the podium in the front of the class writing his papers, while they waited for the final bell to ring for class to begin. The bell rang, and the teacher picked up her papers and tapped them together on the podium to straighten them and set them back down. Then she asked the students to quiet down. She asked the class if they had all remembered to do their assigned reading homework the night before on folk tales, and the students mumbled an awkward confirmation in unison. The teacher asked the students to tell her some of the characteristics of folk tales. Various students raised their hands, and as they gave answers, the teacher listed them on the chalkboard, and they discussed each one. The teacher then asked the students to give her examples of some famous folk tales. The students responded with answers like Jack and the Beanstalk, Little Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel. One student decided to take things in a dark direction and answered El Cucuy, which made many of the students laugh. After the teacher got the class to calm down, she explained that the student was correct about El Cucuy being a folk tale, and that it had some interesting differences from the other ones that had been mentioned. The teacher explained that the tale of El Cucuy did have many similar elements to other folk tales, such as the character's magical transformation into a monster, and it being a lesson for him for mistreating his children. When she went on to explain that the most important difference between it and other folk tales was that it did not have a happy ending. In fact, it didn't really have an ending at all, since the people continued to tell the story the same way, the main character still searching for the souls of his deceased children. She concluded her discussion on the topic by stating that every culture has its own version of the Boogeyman, and that many of these tales were very similar to each other. The bell rang, and as the children gathered their things, the teacher shouted over the raucous that the evening's homework was to choose a folk tale and outline each of the characteristics they had spoken about. The students filed out of the class, and Tavo and Daniel began walking toward their next classes together. As they walked, Tavo asked Daniel if he remembered Javier. Daniel stopped and looked at Tavo confused. He replied that he did remember Javier, and asked Tavo why he mentioned him. Tavo hesitated for a moment, and then asked Daniel not to judge him for what he was about to say. Tavo told Daniel that what Teresa had described to him sounded very similar to what he had seen that night at the sleepover party. Daniel now smirked at Tavo with disbelief at where he thought Tavo was taking this. He asked Tavo if he was trying to say that he believed Teresa was seeing El Cucuy. Then he asked what it had to do with Javier. Tavo hesitated again, and then told Daniel that the next thing he had to say might sound even crazier. Tavo told Daniel that when he saw whatever it was that he saw that night, that there was one thing he never told anyone. He told Daniel that the face from the closet had appeared to scan the room that night, and how it had smiled frighteningly when it seemingly spotted Javier. He asked Daniel if he thought it was possible that El Cucuy was real, and that he was the one that had taken and killed Javier. Daniel now looked at Tavo with disgust. He reminded him that the homeless man who had told the police he had found Javier's body was the one that was convicted of the murder. He then told Tavo that if he was suggesting that El Cucuy was now stalking his sister, then perhaps he needed to get some kind of counseling, because evidently the events that had occurred years before had affected him more than he had realized. Tavo laughed and apologized to Daniel. He told Daniel that he was right, and he didn't know why he hadn't thought of it. The warning bell rang, and the two had to go their separate ways to the next class. As Daniel began to jog away, he turned back to Tavo and shouted to him that he was taking his sister hiking in an urban trailhead after school if he wanted to join them. He said he was sure that Teresa would love to see him. Tavo shouted back that he was in and that he'd text after school. He then turned to run to class before the final bell rang. After school, Tavo and Daniel texted each other and made arrangements to meet up at the hiking trail after they finished their homework, and Daniel picked up Teresa. Teresa loved to go on these hiking trips because they made her feel like she was walking through the wilderness, even though they were in the middle of town. The fact that there were hardly any others on the trail added to the effect. Daniel hoped that the hike would help her get her mind off of whatever was keeping her up at night. When the group arrived at the trailhead, Tavo noticed how tired Teresa looked, and he asked Daniel if she was okay. Daniel replied that she had told him she had slept a little the night before, and that she was excited to go on this excursion despite fatigue. Tavo agreed, and the three began their hike. As the three hiked, they stopped from time to time for various reasons. They took time to take selfies and make videos for social media. They looked at different types of flowers and foliage they came across. They even stopped for a few minutes for Teresa to take a cat nap on her brother's lap, while Daniel and Tavo sat and talked about who they were thinking of asking to the prom. While Teresa slept, Daniel told Tavo that his father said that Teresa kept trying to sleep during the day and stay up all night. He said that she was also refusing to go into dark rooms or places alone. Their father tried to say that she was just going through a late fear of the dark phase, but Daniel was worried it was something else. He told Tavo that he knew his sister didn't get that much attention at his father's house. It was the reason he spent so much time with her. But he wondered if something else worse was going on. Tavo asked Daniel what he meant, and Daniel went on to explain that he was beginning to wonder if his sister was being abused in some way by either their father or her stepmother. He said that he didn't like throwing accusations out, but that her recent changes in behavior were beginning to make him think the worst. Teresa woke from her snooze and apologized for falling asleep. Tavo told her it was okay, because now she'd be able to keep up better. The three resumed their hike down the urban trail and came to an area where the wind had gathered a lot of garbage along the fence that lined the trail. As they approached the pile, Teresa was walking a little ahead of her brother and Tavo. She noticed something in the pile and asked the two young men what it was. The two boys got up to her and looked toward where she was pointing, and both saw what she was looking at. It looked like it might be an old doll. Daniel walked up to the pile and squatted down to have a look, while Tavo stood back with Teresa. As Daniel moved some of the trash aside to uncover the doll, he suddenly jumped back and shouted in horror. Teresa asked again what it was, as Daniel ran back to his sister and friend. Tavo asked what it was, and Daniel responded that they had to leave the area right away. He suggested they go back to the area where they had sat while Teresa napped and call the police. Tavo looked at Daniel confused as Daniel grabbed Teresa's hand and urged her to run with him. Tavo followed a few moments later, and they were back at their previous rest area. The three sat and Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket. Teresa continued to ask what it was that had been in the trash pile, but Daniel continued to ignore her. Daniel looked at Tavo as he made a phone call. Tavo could hear the emergency dispatcher on Daniel's phone. Daniel told the dispatcher that he was calling out from the urban trail that the police needed to be sent out immediately. When the dispatcher asked him what the emergency was, Daniel told her that there was a dead body on the trail. Tavo and Teresa went pale with shock when they heard what Daniel said to the operator. A short time later, police arrived at the trailhead. Daniel, Teresa, and Tavo had walked back to the trailhead under the instructions of the emergency dispatcher. As the two officers began to talk to Daniel about what the group had found, a Parks and Recreation officer arrived, towing a quad ATV. She unloaded the ATV while the officers got the location of the trash pile from Daniel. One of the officers stayed with the children, while the other got onto the ATV with the Parks and Rec officer and headed down the trail. While they waited, the police officer pulled Daniel aside and asked him if his little sister had also seen the body. Daniel told him no, that he was the only one who had seen it up close. The only thing she was able to see was its hair. After a few minutes, the officer got a call on the radio from his partner. The other officer and the Parks and Recs officer had located the body. The group could hear the other officer over the radio saying the coroner needed to be contacted. He said that homicide should probably be called down as well. A short time later, the coroner's office arrived, as did 2 homicide detectives. Tavo, Daniel, and Teresa had attempted to leave, but the police officer told them that the homicide detective would need to speak to them. He had the children contact their parents, so he could speak to them and let them know what was going on. When Tavo and Daniel reached their parents, the officer explained to them all what had happened to the children would most likely be allowed to go home soon, since they had no real information other than the location. He did ask that all the parents come to the trailhead to make sure the kids were in safe, good emotional state. The 2 detectives approached the officer and children and introduced themselves to the kids as Detectives Kim and Cook. They asked the officer if their parents had been contacted, and he confirmed they had and were all on their way. The detectives asked the children how they had come across the body, and Daniel explained. As he did so, Tavo noticed that a game and fish officer had also arrived, which he found unusual. Another police SUV had arrived also, towing 2 more ATVs. As Daniel told the story to the detectives, the officers unloaded the ATVs and headed down the trail with the coroner and the game and fish officer. It wasn't long after that the media started to arrive on the scene. Television news reporters, print journalists, and bloggers all began lining up along the police tape that had been hung along the entrance of the trailhead. The children's parents all unfortunately arrived after the media blitz, which added to their anxiety about the situation. Tavo's mother and father had both arrived, as did Daniel and Teresa's mother and her fiancé. A little while later, their father and stepmother also arrived. The parents were allowed beyond the police tape and led to their children, who were still with the original officer who had stayed with them, and the 2 homicide detectives. The 2 detectives explained to the parents that they had already asked the children all that they needed to. As the officers had told them, the only real information the kids had was the location and the time they had found it. They asked the parents to keep a close eye on the kids for the remainder of the day, and that the police behavioral health resources could pass on to them any information they might need if they had felt the kids may need help dealing with the traumatic event. Detective Cucuy handed each of the parents a brochure and told the parents that they and the children could be on their way. Daniel and Teresa's father quickly snatched her up in his arms and hugged her tightly. It was the first time Daniel had seen him do that in quite some time. Even her stepmother, who usually ignored her, acted as if Teresa had been physically or otherwise injured during the ordeal. Their father looked at Daniel, and as he held Teresa and asked him if she was okay, Daniel replied that despite the fact he was the only one who got really close to look at the body, he was fine. He urged his father and stepmother to take Teresa home and to keep a close watch on her. As Daniel's parents got into their car with Teresa, he approached his mother and her fiancé. He asked if it was okay if he stayed with Tavo for a little bit before going home. Since he had driven himself and Teresa onto the trailhead, he asked their mother's fiancé if he would mind driving his car home for him, and that Tavo would drop him off later. His mother and her fiancé agreed, as they were sure that Daniel was okay, and they left in the 2 cars. Tavo's parents could tell that something was troubling him. They asked him repeatedly if he was okay, and he assured them that he was. He heard Daniel ask his mother if he could stay with Tavo for a while, so he also asked his parents if he could stay with them for a bit before coming home. He told them that he felt Daniel may need him, as he really had no idea of the full extent of what Daniel had seen when he uncovered the body. Tavo's parents agreed on one condition, that they not remain out too late. As everyone left the trailhead, the commotion was almost overwhelming. The noise of the police radios, shouting journalists, and now even television news helicopters above was deafening. Daniel and Tavo got into Tavo's car and were allowed to pass the police tape. The 2 drove slowly through the throng of humanity that was gathering around the police tape and finally got to the clear road. Daniel asked Tavo if he was hungry, and Tavo replied, "A little." There was a family-friendly sports bar that the boys frequented because they thought the food was better than any fast food place or diner nearby. Daniel suggested they go there, and Tavo agreed and began driving in that direction. The drive to the sports bar wasn't very long, but it seemed longer to both boys due to the anxiety in the air. The two didn't speak after deciding where to go. Tavo occasionally glanced over at Daniel, but didn't say anything, as his expression never changed the entire ride. When they reached the sports bar, they went inside and had a seat at the table they usually did. The bartender, Lena, saw the boys walk in, and since they were regulars, she was at their table side before they even sat down. She told them that the Philly cheesesteaks were the special of the day, and they both said yes to it. Lena walked away to put in the orders, and the two boys sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, Tavo broke the silence and asked Daniel if he was okay. Daniel replied that he was. Lena returned to the table with 2 iced teas for the boys and told them their food would be ready soon. The boys thanked her, and as she walked away, a breaking news story was announced on some of the bar's televisions. The anchors began talking about the body that had been discovered at the urban trail, and another journalist who was at the scene appeared on the screen as well. When the screen focused on her, the journalist at the scene began giving details about the discovery that were just now being released by authorities. The journalist repeated the story about how 3 miners who had been hiking the urban trail had stumbled across the body. She said that the body was eviscerated. Tavo sat back in shock upon hearing that. The journalist added that she had acquired an exclusive update. She went on to say that the remains had been identified as belonging to a missing 8-year-old boy named Travis Wolf. The boy had been reported missing a few days before. He had apparently been abducted from his own bedroom. Tavo remembered thinking it was a doll at first, but he hadn't considered that the body that they had found could belong to a child. He turned to Daniel and asked him if that was why he had rushed them away so adamantly, because he knew that it was a kid. He replied yes, that he didn't want Teresa to see it. She had been struggling enough with her fear recently, and Tavo asked why Daniel didn't tell him how bad it was. Daniel replied that he didn't really know it was that bad either. He said that there was enough garbage covering the body that he couldn't see the complete horror that the news was describing. He said that he did get close enough to see that it was a dead body, and that it was a child. Lena returned to the boys' table with their cheesesteaks, and she set them down, one with fries for Daniel and one with potato salad for Tavo. She asked the boys if they had heard about what the news was reporting. Tavo let out a nervous chuckle, recomposed himself quickly. He asked Daniel if it was okay to tell her, and Daniel nodded yes. Lena was looking at the two confused at this point. Tavo told her that they were the miners, along with Daniel's little sister, who the news was talking about, discovering the body. Lena held her hand to her mouth in shock. She asked Daniel if his sister was okay, and he replied yes, that she hadn't seen the body. Lena then asked the two boys if they were okay, and Tavo replied yes, and Daniel replied that he would be. Lena sat next to Daniel and hugged him, then she did the same to Tavo. She told the boys that their meals were on the house. She told them that if they needed to talk or anything, that she was there for them. The boys thanked her, and she walked away to attend to other patrons who were trying to get her attention. The boys ate their food, and for the remainder of the evening tried not to talk about the day's events anymore. When they finished, they left a $20 tip on the table for Lena and shouted thank you to her as they left. The silence took over again in the car as Tavo drove Daniel home. As the two entered Daniel's neighborhood, he asked Tavo who could have done those horrible things to that missing boy. As they pulled up to Daniel's mother's house, Tavo replied that he didn't know. Daniel got out of the car and told Tavo that he would text him the next day. Tavo Tavo nodded his head, and Daniel shut the car door. Tavo watched his friend get inside the house, and then drove home. When Tavo got home, his parents were waiting for him in the living room while watching the news on television. As he walked in the door, his mother quickly jumped to her feet and greeted him with a hug. Tavo's father sat quietly in his chair and observed as his mother obsessed and asked if he was okay. Tavo repeatedly attempted to assure her that he was, but nothing he said would comfort her. The journalists on the news were again talking about the body that the children had discovered. Tavo told his mother to relax. He understood her fear, but he assured her that it wasn't necessary, and she was not the one the news story was talking about. Tavo's mother took a step back and apologized. She told him that seeing things like that happen to other children would always make her worry about him. Tavo reminded his mother that he wasn't a child. He was in high school. She told him that if it didn't matter how old he got, he would always be her baby. On the news, the same journalist the boys had watched before at the sports bar began revealing more details about the young boy. The journalist said that she was the first to announce that the boy's mother had been arrested as a person of interest in the case, but had not officially been charged with the boy's murder yet. She reported that the mother had an open case with the Department of Child Safety against her. Apparently, the boy had been sent to a school nurse several times with suspicious bruising. He also once had collapsed on the playground at school due to severe dehydration and malnutrition. The boy's father had died a few months before in prison. His cell had somehow caught fire. The Department of Child Safety had apparently reported that they were in the process of removing the child from his mother's custody when he went missing. Tavo's father turned off the television, declaring that he'd had enough. He made a comment about how that journalist, Lisa Contreras, always seemed to get the inside scoop before any other local journalist. Tavo's father then declared that it had been a long day and that they all should attempt to get some rest, though he understood that sleep may be an issue. Tavo's mother agreed and asked Tavo again if he were all right. Tavo reassured her again that he was fine, and he agreed that it was a good idea to call it a night, even though it was still relatively early. Tavo hugged his mother tightly and said goodnight to both of his parents. He retired to his room, but as his father had suspected, there was no way he could go to sleep. After hearing more of the details, the day's events were just a little too serious and real. He attempted to lay down, but eventually grew bored, just staring at his ceiling fan, and he picked up his phone. He opened one of the social media apps and found that all his friends and followers were talking about the dead boy. He scrolled through posts and watched a few reels, but grew tired of it again. He wondered why people were so apt to talk about terrible things instead of letting them fade. As he was about to close the app, one last reel caught his attention. A girl from a different but nearby high school explained on the video that when she was a baby, she was taken from her parents by the Department of Child Safety and placed into foster care and was eventually adopted. She went on to explain that she had recently decided to research her biological family and found some horrible things out. She said that things were very similar to the discovery of the boy's body that had happened that day. Tavo clicked on the girl's profile, which was public, and began watching some of the other videos she had posted. It turned out that she had begun posting a series of videos earlier that day when she had first heard the news of what Tavo and his friends had stumbled upon. The videos told the rest of the story of her and her birth family. Tavo watched each of the videos until he got the entire story. In the next video, the girl explained that she had learned that she had had a sister once that she had never met because their mother was pregnant with her when her sister disappeared. Her sister, who was 9 years old at the time, was abducted from her bedroom one night. She was reported missing a few days later. Her body was found by a jogger in a park. By the condition of the remains, authorities first speculated that she'd either been attacked by an animal or that one had found her body before the jogger. In another video, she went on to explain that when the autopsy was performed, it was discovered that her sister's body did have teeth marks on it, but they were not from an animal. Although somewhat irregular, the marks they found appeared to be from a human. The investigation revealed that the girl's biological father was a meth addict with a history of abusing her biological mother. Her mother had a scar on her shoulder from where her father had bitten her in a fit of rage. The bite mark on the mother's shoulder turned out to match one on her sister. In the next video, the girl said that after more research, she learned that her father had been arrested and convicted of the abduction and murder of her sister. He was sentenced to life in prison where he remained. Her biological mother would spiral into opioid addiction after this happened, which is what resulted in her being removed from her custody by the Department of Child Safety shortly after she was born. Further research told her that her biological mother was eventually sent to prison for drug-related charges, where she too remained. It appeared to be the last video in the series, so when Tavo finished it, he followed the girl's profile and set his phone down. He laid down on his side and closed his eyes in vain in an attempt to go to sleep. Only a few short moments later, he received a notification on his phone. When he checked it, he saw that the girl had just posted another video, and he clicked to view it. In the video, the girl explained that the family who had adopted her were a blessing. She thought of them as her real parents, and had an adopted brother who she treasured. She admitted that she was not adopted right away as a baby. She had actually bounced around in foster homes until she was 6 years old. She said that she had memories of feeling out of place and often wondered where her biological family had gone. She went on to explain that she also had another memory from that time period that she tried not to think about. She said that she grew up afraid of the dark and dark places because of what she saw coming out of them from time to time. She said that when she was alone, she would often see a twisted face watching her from the shadows. Oftentimes, she would scream and her foster parents would angrily run in to check on her. She said the face would go away, but never for long. The video ended, and Tavo let out a frustrated grunt. That couldn't be all, he thought. Moments later, his phone chimed with another notification. Tavo was anxious and excited to see that she had posted another video. In this one, she said that she remembered one night when she was 6 at her final foster home. She thought the face from the shadows was going to get her. She recalled being ill and given medicine to help her symptoms and also to help her sleep. That night, her closet door opened on its own, and she saw 2 hands with long, claw-like fingers emerge from the darkness, followed by the face she had seen so many times before. As she fought the drowsy effects of the medication, she said that she remembered the figure completely emerging from the darkness and walking toward her. She said that the last thing she remembered was gathering all of the conscious energy she had left to let out what she hoped was a scream. She said that the next morning, she woke and was visited by her caseworker from the Department of Child Safety. Tavo had waited a few minutes for the girl to post another video. She concluded her story by saying that was the morning she met her adoptive family. She explained that when she got to their house, she immediately felt a sense of belonging. They had prepared their house for her and taken so many other steps to make her feel welcome. She said that the first day with them, she felt more love than she had in her entire life. She went on to say that she had slept very soundly that night, so much so that her new family had to wake her the next morning to make sure that she was okay because she slept so late. She said that she never saw the face in the shadows again. She paused for a moment that seemed like an eternity to Tavo. And then she looked at the camera and said, "I think my older sister was taken by El Cucuy." The video ended and Tavo noticed that the girl was online. He had questions for her. He had never heard anyone else describe what he himself had seen in such detail, what he had considered accuracy. Could it be that he didn't imagine it so many years ago? This memory he had tried so hard to suppress had come back to haunt him these last few days. Now he learned that others had experienced it. Could the girl be right about her sister? Could the boy have been taken by El Cucuy? Tavo messaged the girl by simply saying, "I believe you. Can we talk?" A moment later, she replied, "Yes, but not tonight." The girl was no longer online, and Tavo began to think about Teresa. He had to talk to Daniel's little sister without Daniel finding out. He had to see if she was being haunted by the same thing. Tavo still couldn't sleep, so he decided to do some research on his own. Tavo knew of 3 different children who had suffered similar fates: the girl's sister, a classmate from childhood, and the boy he had found. Tavo didn't know what to think. He decided to research the case of his old classmate to see what details he may not know about. He looked up his old classmate Javier and quickly found articles and video clips and news coverage of the event. He scanned through several of them, but didn't find anything he didn't already know about the case. Every article rehashed how the boy had been reported missing and then found dead. They all talked about the homeless man who had been convicted of his murder, but not the abduction. Investigators believed that Javier had actually run away from home. They concluded that while out on the street those few days, Javier was unfortunate to encounter the men who would murder him. Tavo continued to scroll through link after link, hoping to find something different, and just when he was about to give up, he did. Tavo came across a link to an article on a cryptozoology website that mentioned Javier's name, which he thought odd. He clicked on the article, curious to see if it were really the same Javier that he had known, and it was. The article mentioned all of the same facts that the news articles had, but it had a few points that Tavo had never heard before. The article talked about how there were people who believed that Javier had not run away from home, but rather he had been abducted from his own bed. The article explained that police investigators who responded to Javier's home the morning he was reported missing had noted that the family told them they had checked all over the house and yard for Javier, as well as neighbors and parents of friends who lived nearby, before they contacted police. Javier's parents, admittedly, were not very concerned at first about Javier's absence that morning. Once they exhausted all resources, their concern finally grew, and they contacted police. The article further explained that the police report stated that police asked the family about points of entry to their house, and that the parents stated that all of the doors were locked when they woke and found the boy missing. They had neglected to check windows, so police checked and found that all the windows were still closed and locked as well. Javier's parents swore they had not touched any of the windows. The article went on to say that the homeless man, who had been convicted of Javier's murder, was not charged with the abduction because of these findings. Police were convinced that Javier had left the house and locked the door behind him. The article then explained that the reason the homeless man was convicted of Javier's murder was due to bite marks found on the body that matched the man's teeth. The man's name was Howard Christoph, and after serving 2 years of his life sentence, he was killed by a fellow inmate who learned of his conviction. The article then took a turn that Tavo had not expected, and reminded him that he was on a cryptozoology website. The article stated the author did not believe that Howard Christoph had killed Javier. The author explained that he believed that Javier had been killed by some kind of cryptozoological creature, but that they had not figured out which one yet. The article went on to mention other cases of children who had gone missing all over the world. All the children the articles mentioned were found in similar fashion. Some were outdoors and eviscerated. In some cases, people had been convicted of homicide. In other cases, remained unsolved. All cases had one horrendous thing in common, though: human teeth marks on the body. The author went on to explain that they had come in contact with a few different cryptos that were more than capable of committing the acts, but would not have left human bite marks. The author explained that she did have a theory I had no hard evidence yet to back it. The author stated that they believed a creature most would scoff at them for mentioning could be to blame for all these children's deaths. The article stated that the creature was known by many names all over the world, but the most common one were the Boogeymen, El Coco, and El Cucuy. Tavo held his breath for a moment upon reading that, and scrolled down further to reveal an artist's depiction that matched what he had seen so many years ago with his own eyes. He kept scrolling, and when he reached the article's footnotes, it mentioned that the author of the article was a woman named Natasha Blake, and it had an email address to contact her. Tavo knew he needed to email the author, but he wasn't sure what to say. He was finally beginning to feel tired enough to sleep and decided that he'd decide how to approach things with both Natasha Blake and the video girl in the morning. He thought of Teresa and decided to text Daniel, even though Daniel told him he would text the next day. Daniel replied, and Tavo asked him if he had talked to his sister. Daniel replied that he had gone over to his father's house to spend the night at Teresa's request. The two were camping in a pillow fort they had just finished building in his father's living room. Tavo texted that he was just checking on them both and that they'd talk in the morning. He set his phone down on the nightstand and switched the light off. Then he laid down and fell asleep. The next morning, Tavo woke and checked his phone. He had a DM notification from social media. It was a message from the girl whose videos he had watched the previous night. He opened it and the message read, "Why do you believe me? No one else does." Tavo stared at his phone for a moment, hesitant to reply with what he knew he had to. Then he typed out, "Because I've seen it too," and pressed send. The girl read it immediately and replied by asking, "When?" Tavo replied, "When I was 9, at a friend's house. I have a story similar to yours to tell." The girl replied, "Your profile says you go to Greenhaven High School. Can we meet and you can tell me?" Tavo's teenage hormones kicked in for the moment, and he became excited and anxious at the thought of meeting the girl in person because he thought she was cute. Then he remembered what they would be talking about, and he returned to his senses. He replied, "Sure. When and where?" She replied, "Today, after school. Somewhere public. No offense." Tavo laughed and replied, "None taken. Totally get it. Sports bar by the grocery store near your school. It's family friendly." He wasn't sure how the girl was going to respond to that, but it was the first thing that came to his mind. He was surprised when she quickly replied, "I know it. Go there with my family, sometimes. 4 o'clock? Tavo replied, "See you there. My name is Tavo, by the way." The girl replied, "Mine's Raven." Tavo realized what time it was and hopped out of bed to get ready for school. He quickly gathered some clothes and took a shower. When he got out and dressed, he texted Daniel. Daniel replied and told him that he and his sister were not going to school. Instead, he was going to spend some time with her. Daniel replied to text him if they needed anything. Then he was on his way out the door to go to school. Tavo texted Daniel throughout the day to check in on him and his sister. Daniel told Tavo that Teresa had actually had a pretty good night after they settled into the pillow fort. He said that their father and stepmother had been exceptionally nice because of what had happened the day before. He also told Tavo that he wishes they would continue to be this nice to Teresa, but he knew it wouldn't last. Daniel asked Tavo what he was doing after school. He said that Teresa had asked him if Tavo was going to hang out with them again. Tavo told Daniel that he would try, but that he might not be able to make it. He explained that he had something he had to do after school. When Daniel asked what it was, Tavo was reluctant to tell him that he was meeting up with a girl he met online to talk about El Cucuy. He said that his parents had made him an appointment with a counselor to talk about what had happened the day before, and they insisted that he go. Daniel ended the thread by texting Tavo, "Loser," with a laughing emoji. After school, Tavo had a little time before he was supposed to meet Raven at the sports bar, so he stopped by Daniel's father's house. When he reached up to ring the doorbell, Teresa flung the door open and tightly hugged Tavo as she shouted his name. Daniel came to the door and told Tavo that she had seen him approaching on the doorbell camera and got excited. Tavo hugged Teresa back and asked her how she was. Teresa told him that she didn't see El Cucuy the night before because Daniel was there to protect her. Daniel quickly reminded Teresa that he had agreed not to talk about El Cucuy. Then he asked Tavo if he was skipping his counseling appointment. Tavo replied that the appointment was at 4 o'clock, and that since he had asked earlier if he would hang out, he figured he could at least stop by and check on them before he went out. Daniel told Teresa to go pick out which frozen pizza she wanted to eat while they watched a movie, and he'd be there in a minute to put it in the oven. Teresa asked Tavo if he was staying for the movie, and he told her that he had to go to his appointment. Teresa sighed and she said okay, and ran off to the kitchen. When Teresa was out of earshot, Daniel asked Tavo where he was really going with a smirk on his face. When Tavo reacted, Daniel told him not to look so shocked, because neither of them were ever able to lie to each other. Tavo laughed and admitted that he'd been caught. He still didn't want to tell Daniel the whole truth though, so instead he just left out some details. Tavo told Daniel that he had met a girl on social media that attended Mountainside High School nearby, and he was meeting her in person at the sports bar. Daniel joked with Tavo that he had burned all his bridges with the girls at their school, so he was reaching out to girls at other schools for a prom date. Tavo shot back at Daniel that at least he was trying to find a prom date. Teresa came running back from the kitchen, declaring that she had chosen a ham and pineapple pizza for the movie, and now Tavo joked with her, telling her that pineapple didn't belong on pizza, and he was glad he wasn't staying for the movie. Tavo hugged Teresa and told her that he had to go. He told Daniel he'd text him later, and Daniel told him that instead he should pay attention to the girl and text him in the morning. Tavo flipped Daniel the bird and turned back to his car. Daniel shouted at him, asking what the girl's name was. Tavo stopped and turned back to Daniel and replied, "Raven." Daniel replied just by saying, "Nice," and the two turned and walked away. A little while later, Tavo was sitting in his usual booth at the sports bar. Since it was during the work week and fairly early still, the place wasn't very busy. Lena was working as usual and had set Tavo up with an iced tea, and he told her that he would wait for the person he was meeting to arrive before deciding on food. Lena had inquired as to who he was meeting, and when he replied that it was a girl, she teased him. He explained to her that it wasn't that type of meeting, and she told him that she was joking, and to let her know if he needed anything else while he waited. So now Tavo sat and waited, watching the golf tournament that the sports bar was showing on their television. He looked at his phone to see if it had any notifications or messages from Raven, and he did not. He noted that it was almost 4:30, but he felt uncomfortable messaging her. As he was about to flag down Lena for a refill of tea, he heard a girl's voice say his name behind him. He turned around and saw that it was Raven. He sat dumbfounded for a moment because his teenage hormones kicked in again, and he realized that Raven was even more attractive in person than in her videos that he thought. He snapped himself out of it again when she looked at him confused, and he stood and apologized and replied that yes, it was Tavo. He asked Raven to sit down, as they both did across from each other. Lena approached the table with an iced tea and a raspberry lemonade. She set the tea in front of Tavo and the lemonade in front of Raven. She commented that she wasn't aware the two of them knew each other, and Raven explained that they had actually just met. Lena said that she understood and asked if they wanted to order food. Raven declined, so Tavo did as well, to be polite. Lena told them to let her know if they changed their minds, and left them alone to talk. When Lena was gone, Raven got right to the point. She said to Tavo that he had heard her story and that he had one to tell her, and she was ready to hear it. Tavo told Raven about the sleepover birthday party when he was younger, and what he had seen that night. Then he told her about how Riet had disappeared and was found dead. He told her about how Howard Kristoff had been convicted of the crime, and was killed in prison. Then he told her that he didn't believe he had done it. Tavo explained that he felt the same thing had taken both Javier and Raven's sister, and that he too believed that it was El Cucuy. Raven just stared at Tavo for a moment. As it was beginning to make him feel uncomfortable, she took out her phone and looked up Javier's name to verify that Tavo was telling the truth. When she confirmed that he was, she looked back up from her phone and asked him why else he had contacted her. Tavo hesitated for a moment, and then he told her that it was because he was afraid that his best friend's little sister was in danger, that she too had been seeing El Cucuy. She again asked Tavo why, to which Tavo replied that he needed someone who would believe him to help him find the truth. Then he told her that they weren't the only ones who believed. She again looked at him confused and asked him what he meant. Tavo explained to her about the article he had found online, that the author, Natasha Blake, had been researching the disappearances of children all over the world and also believed that El Cucuy was to blame. He pulled the article up on his phone and showed it to her. She took his phone and scrolled through reading the article. When she finished, she handed him his phone back and admitted to him that she was a little skeptical because the article was written for a cryptozoology website. She asked him if he also believed that Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster were real. Tavo joked and told her that he wasn't sure anymore. Lena returned to the table with another tea and lemonade and sat them down. She asked the two if they had changed their minds about food. Raven said that she wanted to order a chili cheeseburger. Tavo was both surprised and grateful and ordered the same. Lena walked away to put in the orders. Tavo told Raven that he meant to email Natasha Blake, but that he wasn't sure what to say or to ask. He said that he wondered if she had any additional information they could use to find out if all of this was really happening. Raven suggested that they email her and simply ask what kind of evidence she was looking for to prove the existence of El Cucuy. Then she joked that while they were at it, they should ask her just what other cryptos she claimed to have encountered in her article. Tavo said that it was worth a try, and did as Raven suggested. He asked what they should do while they waited for a response. Raven pointed out that the footnotes of the article also cited certain reference stories about some of the other missing children that Natasha had mentioned in her article. Then she suggested that they attempt to research some of those cases to see if there really were similarities between them all. The two used their phones to look at some of the cases in the article used for reference. Some of the articles were not very informative, as they didn't disclose many details of the case. Some were just stories told by locals about things they had heard. There were a few cases, though, whose details began to match up with the ones that Tavo and Raven were familiar with. Those cases matched up far too well to be a coincidence. There were other cases, locally, like Javier's and Raven's sister, as well as cases in other states and countries that shared these details. All the children disappeared from their own home and were found in the same state. It all didn't seem like enough to prove anything, which Tavo and Raven agreed was most likely why Natasha Blake said in her article that she was looking for definitive evidence. Tavo received an email notification. It was Natasha Blake. He told Raven, and she got excited and got up from her side of the booth and sat beside him. Tavo became anxious for an awkward moment, and she told him to open the email. Natasha replied that video footage was obviously the best way to prove things, but that any type of physical evidence would be a start. A fingerprint, a hair, footprint, anything that could give validity. She added a response to their other question as well, saying that she had previously encountered shapeshifters and a vampire. Tavo and Raven looked at each other with skepticism. Tavo asked Raven if she thought they could trust Natasha. Raven pointed out that at this point, they only had each other, so anything was better than nothing. Tavo noticed that Natasha was currently online and began typing a reply to her. Raven leaned over to him to see what he was saying. Tavo grew nervous and could feel himself start to shake. He stopped typing for a moment, and when he did, Raven asked him if he was okay. He replied that he was fine, but his voice cracked when he did, and Raven giggled at him. Tavo finished typing out his reply and sent the DM. Raven asked him what all he had said, and Tavo replied that he asked Natasha if 2 eyewitness accounts were good for anything. He explained that he and Raven both had stories to share with her. Natasha messaged back that the eyewitness accounts weren't exactly what she was hoping for, but offered to hear them out. She asked if they could video chat. Tavo asked Raven if she was okay with it, and she said yes. Tavo replied yes to Natasha, and she immediately called him. Tavo answered the video call, and Raven scooted close to him to get in the camera frame as well. Natasha greeted them both and thanked them for taking the time to contact her. Then she got right to the point and asked who wanted to tell their story first. Raven volunteered and told Natasha about her biological sister and parents. Tavo followed with his story about Javier and the sleepover party. When Tavo finished, Natasha admitted that both of their stories sounded similar to other ones that she had researched in regards to El Cucuy. Then she asked them why they had decided to contact her. Tavo then told her the story of how he, Daniel, and Teresa had found the body of the missing boy. He told her the news stories sounded similar to some of the ones they had read about in her article. Raven then explained that seeing the story on television had inspired her to tell her story on social media, which is how she came into contact with Tavo. She added that it just so happened that the two of them attended rival high schools that were near each other. Natasha told them that she hadn't heard about the missing boy, and she looked up the story online while she continued talking to them. After reading a few articles, she agreed with them that the recent cases were very similar to both of their stories and to some of the ones that she had researched. Natasha asked them how old they were and if they felt their parents would be okay with her flying in town and setting up a meeting with them. Tavo and Raven looked at each other, and Raven replied that she was okay with meeting Natasha, but she didn't feel comfortable telling her parents that a cryptozoologist was flying into town to meet with her and a boy that she just met online to talk about El Cucuy. Tavo nodded and agreed with Raven. Natasha agreed and stated it would be just as awkward for her, and said they needed to be sure to talk in public place. Just then, Lena returned with their chili cheeseburgers and set one in front of each of them. She asked them if they needed anything else, with a smug tone in her voice, as she noted they were now sitting next to each other. Raven replied that they were okay for now, and as Lena walked away, she turned around, and when she was behind Raven, mouthed the words, "Good job," to Tavo. Tavo felt his face go flush. Natasha mentioned that they appeared to be at a restaurant and asked if it was a place that they often went, so perhaps they could meet there. Tavo replied that it was a sports bar, and as it turned out, both of them were regulars, though they had never run into each other there. Natasha asked them for the name of the sports bar and confirmed its location when she looked it up. They told her that she was correct, and she asked them if they could meet up in a few days. They both agreed and set up a time to meet. Natasha thanked them both for contacting her, and she said she would let them get back to their date. Tavo attempted to explain that it was not a date, but Natasha ended the call before he could get it out. He looked nervously at Raven, and she just laughed at him again. Raven picked up her chili cheeseburger and took a bite, and gazed up at one of the bar's televisions. Tavo was just sitting there, looking at her nervously, and she could feel his gaze, so she turned back to him and asked if he was okay again. Tavo could only let out a squeak, so Raven then asked if he wanted her to move back over to the other side of the table. Tavo unintentionally shouted no, that she was fine, and then he lowered his voice and said it was okay, she could sit there. He picked up his burger and took a huge bite and stared up at the different television that Raven had been looking at. Lena had been walking by and heard everything, and as she passed Raven, she tapped her on the shoulder. When Raven looked at her, Lena mouthed the words, "Good job," then turned and greeted another patron. Raven looked at Tavo. He turned toward her and smiled, and she couldn't help but smile back. The weekend came, as did the day and time that Tavo and Raven were scheduled to meet with Natasha Blake. Tavo hadn't told Daniel because he didn't want Daniel to be angry with him for looking into all this El Cucuy nonsense. Tavo had spent some time with Daniel and Teresa. Teresa had told him that she was still afraid to be alone at night, She was still hearing noises under her bed and seeing things in the darkness. Daniel had spent another night on his sister's floor, and even he admitted that he had woken one night to find the closet door open when he was certain he had closed it. Tavo arrived at the sports bar to find Raven and Natasha already there. They were sitting at the table that Tavo and Daniel usually sat at, and were sitting across from each other. Raven noticed Tavo and waved him over. It was early in the afternoon, so there weren't many other patrons. As he approached the table, Natasha stood up and turned to shake his hand. The two exchanged greetings, and Lena, the bartender, approached with an iced tea, a raspberry lemonade, and a glass of red wine. Natasha sat back down, and Lena set the wine in front of her. Then she set the lemonade in front of Raven, and the iced tea in front of the empty seat next to her. As she turned to walk away, she touched Tavo's arm and whispered to him that she noticed he and Raven were starting to hang out a lot together. Tavo looked at the iced tea for an awkwardly long moment before he noticed both Raven and Natasha looking at him with confused faces. He apologized and took the seat next to Raven. Natasha explained to Tavo that before he arrived, she had been telling Raven about some more of the research she had done on El Cucuy. She explained that there had been several cases over many years of children going missing and being found in the same manner as the cases they had already discussed. Most of the cases had gone unsolved. Whenever someone was found guilty of killing a child in these cases, they were always convicted based on bite marks found on the remains, matching their teeth. She also explained that the cases were becoming more and more frequent and often involved children who came from families who had been accused of neglect or abuse. Many also involved children in foster care under the supervision of Child Protective Services. Raven urged Tavo to tell Natasha something. Natasha, again looking confused, switched her gaze between the other two. Tavo hesitated, and Raven again urged him to tell Natasha, this time adding to tell her why he had messaged her after watching her videos. Natasha focused on Tavo and asked him if there was something they had not yet shared. Tavo then told Natasha that he believed El Cucuy may be after his friend's sister. He told her about some of the things Teresa had tried to tell her parents, teachers, and even he and Daniel. He told her that he had just spoken with Daniel before their meeting, and he was starting to notice unusual things when he spent the night at his father's house with his sister. Tavo added that Daniel being around her used to make everything stop, but that no longer seemed to be the case. He told her about how he didn't want to believe that it could be the same thing he had seen years before, but that he couldn't ignore it given what he and his friends had found. Natasha asked how long it had been going on for, and Tavo explained that as far as he knew, it had started not long after Teresa's half-brother Michael was born. Natasha asked if anyone had thought to set up a camera in Teresa's room. Tavo, feeling foolish and not thinking of it himself, told her that he did not believe so. Natasha said that it wasn't surprising. Most parents think to set up security cameras for infants and toddlers, but not usually for 9-year-olds. Natasha asked Tavo if he thought Teresa's parents would consider trying it, under the guise that they were doing it to make Teresa feel better. Tavo replied that her father and stepmother were more likely to use the yell at the kid to stop being afraid of the dark approach. Raven interjected and asked, what about Daniel? She asked Tavo if he could convince Daniel to spend the night at his father's and set up a camera hidden in his sister's room. Tavo said that he might be able to convince Daniel, but he didn't understand what setting up a camera would do to help. He explained that he didn't need convincing that El Cucuy was real. He wanted to stop him from taking his friend's sister if she was seeing him. Natasha replied that in order to stop it, they had to know for sure what it was they were dealing with. They had to somehow observe to see what could be done to stop it. She explained that she didn't want to put Teresa in danger. If things were happening with Daniel around, and she actually thought it best that Daniel be with her. The idea was to have Daniel spend the night in his sister's room and have him set up a camera. The three of them could take turns monitoring the camera. If anything happened, they could contact Daniel to intervene. Tavo looked at Raven. She told him that she thought it would be okay. She had never heard of any teenage children reporting seeing El Cucuy, so perhaps he would retreat if Daniel woke up, the way he did when Tavo had woken at the sleepover that he had told about. The bartender, Lena, returned to the table and asked the three if they were interested in ordering food. To his surprise, Raven asked Tavo if he would split a basket of french fries with her. He smiled awkwardly and agreed. Natasha asked Lena if a wedge salad was on the menu. Lena replied not technically, but that it was a sports bar, so they had lettuce, tomato, bacon, and blue cheese, so she could make one. Natasha told Lena that she would make sure to pay the tip for her doing so, and Lena rushed off to put the order in. Tavo asked when they were supposed to do all of this. Natasha recalled that Tavo had just spoken with Daniel and Teresa and asked if Daniel was spending the night there again. Tavo replied that he most likely was, and Raven interjected that she had no plans for the night. Natasha understood Raven's hint, and she said that she was thinking the same thing. They should start observing that night. She asked Tavo to contact Daniel to find out for sure if he was spending the night with his sister, and if he was, if they could explain what their plan was. Tavo texted Daniel and asked him to call if he had a moment to talk without Teresa around. Lena returned with the food they had ordered, and as she set the basket of french fries in front of Tavo and Raven, she smiled and winked at them. They both saw and looked at each other, then both looked into their laps. Natasha grinned and asked Tavo to pass the black pepper. Tavo's phone rang. It was Daniel. Tavo answered, and Daniel immediately asked him if things were okay, because he thought it strange Tavo had asked him to call without Teresa around. Tavo told him that he had some things to say to him that may sound absolutely crazy, but he begged him to hear him out. He explained that he asked that Teresa not be around the conversation because it had to do with her. Daniel agreed to listen, albeit reluctantly. Tavo started out by suggesting to Daniel that he set up a camera in Teresa's room while they slept that night. One that he could live stream so that Tavo could keep an eye on anything unusual. That may happen, like the closet door that Daniel had told him about. Daniel hesitantly asked Tavo why he wanted to observe him and his sister sleeping. Tavo explained that was where the sounding crazy part came in. He reminded Daniel of the similarities between Javier's case years ago and the body they had found a few days before. Daniel interrupted him as he knew where Tavo was going with this. He asked Tavo if he really believed that El Cucuy was responsible for those kids, and if he was really planning on attempting to capture El Cucuy on camera in his sister's room. Tavo hesitated and then answered yes. Tavo further explained that it was not entirely his plan. He told Daniel that he had been talking to some others with knowledge of El Cucuy. Then he told Daniel that he was currently meeting with them and they were working on keeping Teresa safe together. Daniel ended the call. Tavo looked at his phone shocked. Raven asked him what was wrong, and he said that Daniel had hung up on them. Then Tavo's phone rang again. This time it was a video call. It was Daniel. Tavo answered the call, and when Daniel's face appeared on the screen, he asked Tavo to talk to whoever he was with. Raven scooted next to Tavo, so she was in camera view, and said hello to Daniel, and introduced herself by saying her name, and that she too had seen El Cucuy when she was younger. Daniel asked if she was the girl whom Tavo had recently met on social media, and she replied that yes, that was how they had met. Daniel then asked who else was there. Natasha called out a hello, and Tavo switched the camera on his phone so Daniel could see her. She told Daniel her name and that she was a researcher for a cryptozoology website. She explained that she had done an extensive amount of research on El Cucuy, and that as crazy as it may sound, she believed it was real. She assured them that everything they were planning was in the interest of keeping his sister safe, and they were running out of time if he was starting to see strange things happen. She explained that El Cucuy would eventually make a move because he would no longer see his presence in Teresa's room as a real threat. She explained that while Tavo had seen El Cucuy at the sleepover that night, El Cucuy was after one boy and did not see the others as a threat. Natasha continued by saying that if they could catch El Cucuy on camera to verify it was him, they could start working on a better plan to either protect Teresa or get rid of El Cucuy himself. Daniel asked to speak to Tavo again. Tavo switched the camera back on him. He hadn't noticed until the screen switched that Raven was still scooted next to him, and he suddenly felt anxious. Daniel told Tavo that he agreed and would set up the camera. He said he would hide it so Teresa didn't know. He told them all that he felt a little creeped out by the three of them would be watching him sleep, but said that he was doing it for his sister. and to show them that they were all crazy for believing in El Cucuy. Daniel told Tavo he would text him when the live stream was set up, and then ended the call. Tavo set his phone down and noticed that Raven had eaten most of the french fries. He looked up at her, and she covered her mouth and laughed and apologized. She told him she would order another basket, but he said it was fine, and the group laughed. While they finished their food, Natasha told them that their town had a pretty extensive crypto history. She told them the reports of shapeshifters like the ones she had previously encountered, and the vampire that she had dealt with had connections to the city as well. The group finished their food, and Natasha asked for the check and handed her credit card to Lena, insisting on paying. She told them the nearby hotel that she was staying at, and told Tavo to contact her when Daniel said they were ready. They could start watching the stream together and take shifts throughout the night as each of them needed to rest. Lena returned with the check, and Natasha quickly signed it and turned it over. As the group headed out the door, Lena called out to Raven and Tavo, asking them when she'd see them next. The two looked at each other, blushed, and walked out the door, with Natasha giggling after them. Lena returned to the table to clean up. When she picked up the check and looked at it, her heart skipped a beat, and her eyes grew wide with shock. Natasha had written a note on the top that said, "Thank you so much for the salad." The tip line said $200. Later that evening, Tavo got a text from Daniel. The text contained a link to the live stream from the camera that Daniel had set up. Tavo texted Raven and Natasha to tell them, and then opened his laptop to look up the live stream. When the feed opened, he could see most of Teresa's bedroom. He thought to himself that Daniel had placed the camera extremely well. Teresa was lying in bed and appeared to be asleep. Daniel was sitting on the floor on a pallet they had made from pillows and blankets. Tavo could see him doing something on his phone. A moment later, Tavo received another text. It was Daniel asking how the view on the live stream was. Tavo replied that it was good. Daniel then replied that he was tired and was about to lay down. Tavo noticed that Raven and Natasha had both logged on to the live stream as well. He texted Daniel to let him know. Daniel texted back a joke about hope he didn't get an erection in the sleep with the girls watching him online. Tavo fired back, joking that Daniel was being gross, considering he was sleeping on the floor of his little sister's room. Tavo watched Daniel set his phone down and look up toward the camera. He gave the camera the middle finger and blew it 2 kisses. Tavo laughed as he knew the finger was for him and the 2 kisses for Raven and Natasha. Natasha texted Tavo, saying that his friend was a charmer. As Daniel appeared to get comfortable, Raven started a group chat by saying that she didn't imagine watching 2 strangers sleep was going to be a thrill a minute, and suggested that they discuss a shift schedule. Natasha replied to the chat that she agreed. Tavo suggested 2-hour intervals, with him taking the first watch. Natasha and Raven agreed, and Natasha volunteered to take second watch. Natasha added that each should attempt to sleep as best they could in between shifts, but urged that if any of them were to see anything, to contact each other. Tavo noticed both Natasha and Raven log off the live stream. Tavo's 2-hour watch seemed to last for a lot longer. He grew tired and tried to occupy his mind with other things to stay awake, but he was also afraid to take his eyes off the laptop screen. After what seemed like a lifetime, Tavo's watch was over. He was about to text Natasha when he saw her log on to the live stream. She texted him saying that she assumed he hadn't seen anything. He confirmed her assumption, and she texted again saying that he could get some rest. Tavo agreed, but rather than sign off the live stream, he elected to leave it open on his laptop screen as he lay down in bed. Natasha's watch was equally uneventful, and a few hours later, Raven received a text from her asking if she was awake. Raven returned the text stating that she was, and that she would log on to the live stream as soon as the coffee she was making was ready. A few minutes later, Natasha saw Raven log on to the live stream, and she texted her that she was going to lie down, as she hadn't actually slept yet. Raven texted back, "Sweet dreams," and sat back in her desk chair while taking a sip of her coffee. A while later, Raven was fighting to stay awake. She thought to herself that she was really glad she had 2 monitors on her gaming computer, as she was playing a puzzle game on one monitor while trying to keep an eye on the live stream on the other. She had fixed herself another cup of coffee, and as she celebrated finishing a level of her game and reached for her coffee when she caught something on the live stream out of the corner of her eye. She quickly focused her attention on the live stream monitor and shook her head to wake herself up a little. Raven noted that Teresa's closet was cracked open. She cursed herself for not noticing if it was completely closed before or not. She nervously ran her finger through her hair and clutched a clump as she stared at the screen. Just as she let out a sigh, thinking things were okay, the closet door seemed to open a little more. Raven kept a close eye, but for a few moments nothing seemed to happen. Daniel rolled over. Raven continued to watch the monitor, and again, just as she was beginning to think everything was okay, the closet door moved again, this time much more dramatically. Raven watched in terror as long, clawed fingers began to reach out of the closet. She reached for her phone and texted the group chat that she had started earlier. Raven noticed that Tavo logged onto the live stream, and shortly after, Natasha was also logged in. A second clawed hand reached out of the closet, and the door opened a little more. Daniel rolled over again, and the hands retreated into the closet. Raven took a breath and attempted to text Tavo again, asking why he was logged on, but not saying anything to the group or to Daniel. Suddenly, one of the hands re-emerged from the closet. She decided to call Tavo and to get a faster response. Tavo answered and sounded groggy. Raven shouted at him through the phone to wake up and asked if he was seeing what she was. Tavo quickly sat up and looked over his laptop. The screensaver had turned on, and he shot out a bit and scurried to the desk. He pressed the spacebar and the live stream screen came back up, and Tavo felt chills as the second clawed hand began to re-emerge from the closet. Tavo forgot for a moment that he was holding his phone as he watched, and Raven yelled at him through the phone to call Daniel. Upon hearing his friend's name, Tavo snapped out of his mesmerized state and told Raven that he was hanging up on her to call Daniel. Tavo ended the call and pulled up Daniel's contact. He could see the closet door open slightly wider on the screen. He pushed send to call Daniel as he watched the laptop screen. Daniel's phone began to ring, and the hands once again disappeared into the closet. Daniel's phone rang several times, but he did not wake up. Tavo could see on the live stream that Daniel's phone was lighting up and appeared to be vibrating, but Daniel failed to stir. The call redirected to Daniel's voicemail, and Tavo could see the light on Daniel's phone screen go out on the live stream. Tavo ended the call and paused for a moment. The closet door remained partially open, but the hands were gone, but only for a moment. As Tavo watched, the clawed hands re-emerged from the closet again, this time opened the door considerably. Tavo watched in terror as a head emerged from the closet and began to look around Teresa's room. Tavo once again snapped himself out of it and attempted to call Daniel. He was also getting frantic texts from the group chat, but was ignoring them. As Daniel's phone began to ring, Tavo could see the screen light up again on the live stream, but once again, Daniel did not stir. Tavo continued to watch, horrified, as this time the phone's vibration also did not seem to bother the figure in the closet. The figure located the source of the light and vibration, and Tavo watched as it examined Daniel and his phone for a moment. The call went to voicemail again, and Tavo could see the light from Daniel's phone screen go out, once again on the live stream. The figure took a step out of the closet. Its long, thin leg led to a grotesquely large foot that was clawed in a similar fashion to its hands. As it partially emerged from the closet, it stood straight, revealing part of its large, wide torso. Tavo was once again frozen, watching the live stream as his phone blew up with notifications from the group chat. Then, as Tavo watched, the figure's focus turned directly to the camera. The face was undeniable. It was, in fact, the same face that Tavo had seen in Javier's closet years ago. Tavo was once again looking directly into the eyes of El Cucuy. The creature stared directly at the camera for a few moments as Tavo remained frozen. It seemed as though it could see Tavo through the live stream, as if they were staring directly at one another. El Cucuy then slowly smiled at the camera, revealing its elongated jaw and rows of teeth. Tavo's phone continued to explode with calls and texts from Raven and Natasha, but he continued to ignore them. The creature's focus finally left the camera and shifted to Teresa, and it slowly began creeping out of the closet like a stalking animal. Tavo rejected the calls that were coming in from Raven and Natasha so he could try to call Daniel again. As Daniel's phone rang, Tavo saw it light up again on the live stream, and Cucuy paused for a moment and looked at it. It looked back up at the camera and smiled again, then refocused on Teresa. Tavo ended the call and called again. Daniel did not stir. Tavo did it again, still no response from Daniel, and Cucuy crept closer and closer to Teresa. Tavo tried again. Finally, the erratic vibration of call after call woke Daniel. He stirred to reach for the phone as Tavo continued to watch on the live stream. The creature looked at the camera again and gave it an angry sneer that sent chills down Tavo's spine. Then, like a shadow, it vanished back into the closet as Daniel answered. "Hello?" Tavo shouted at Daniel through the phone to get up and check the closet. He watched on the live stream as Daniel got up and walked over to the closet. He opened the door and switched on the light, then switched it back off. He told Tavo there was nothing, but asked how the closet door got open. Tavo told him that he was going to have to watch the live stream recording, because he would not otherwise believe him. The notifications from Raven and Natasha paused, but Tavo could see they were still logged on to the live stream. A fourth person had also logged on to view. Tavo watched Daniel look over at Teresa, who still slept. Daniel told Tavo that this was the sound as he'd seen her sleep in quite some time. Just as he said that, Teresa stirred. Through the phone, Tavo could hear her ask Daniel what was wrong. Daniel told her he was just getting up and going to the bathroom and to go back to sleep. Daniel ended the call and texted Tavo instead. He let Tavo know that he would text him in the morning. On the live stream, Tavo could see Daniel close the closet door. He placed a chair in front of it and left the room, presumably to go to the bathroom, as he had told Teresa. Tavo got a text from the group chat. It was Natasha, saying that they had gotten all the proof she needed. A follow-up text stated that she had reached out to a local colleague about finding a way to stop Cucuy. Raven then sent a text through the group chat asking if Daniel had seen anything. Tavo replied that Daniel told him he saw nothing, but indicated that Teresa had been sleeping very soundly. Tavo added that Daniel also seemed to be, judging from the number of times he had to call to wake him. Natasha suggested that they maintain a watch on Daniel's behalf on the live stream. Tavo could see that all three of them were still logged in. Tavo also saw Daniel return to the room and check on Teresa before laying back down on the floor. Tavo agreed, and he was up, and his heart was still racing. He also volunteered to take over the rest of Raven's watch. Raven thanked him and added that she was unlikely to sleep anymore. Herself, given what they had just watched. Natasha concurred that her sleep time for the night was also over. The three all remained logged in and watching the live stream. Nothing else would happen that night. The next day, Tavo woke to a text from Daniel. It was mid-morning, and Daniel said in the text that he had watched the recording of the live stream. He sent a second text where he apologized for not believing Tavo all those times over the years, especially the most recent ones. Then he sent a series of frantic-sounding texts asking various things. How can it be real? Why does it want my sister? What can we do to stop it? Tavo texted Daniel back that he didn't know the answers to any of his questions and that he needed to contact Natasha. Just then, he received a text from the group chat. It was Natasha saying that she had been in touch with her local friend who might be able to help them. She wanted all of them, including Daniel, to meet as soon as possible to discuss what to do. Raven replied to the chat that the sports bar was already open for early games and they could all meet there. Tavo replied that he agreed and would bring Daniel with him. Natasha texted that she would let her friend know where to meet them. Tavo texted Daniel again and let him know he would be on his way to pick him up shortly. A short time later, Tavo arrived at Daniel's father's house to find Daniel waiting outside. As he pulled up, Daniel approached the car and got in. Things were quiet at first as the two headed toward the sports bar, but about halfway through the drive, Daniel finally broke the silence. He told Tavo that Teresa was still sleeping. He said that He still couldn't believe what he had seen on the recording. It was like something out of a horror movie. He asked who they were going to meet and what they were going to do. Tavo explained that they were going to meet up with Natasha and Raven, and that Natasha had also mentioned bringing a friend who may be able to help them with what to do next. He said that he wasn't sure about what he had watched himself. Daniel then went on a bit of a rant. He rambled about Javier and the body they had found. He rambled about how he couldn't let his sister end up like that, and asked again why El Cucuy was coming for her. Tavo still didn't know how to answer, but did his best to ease Daniel's mind. He told Daniel how knowledgeable Natasha was about El Cucuy, and said that if her friend was anything like her, there should be something they could do. They arrived at the sports bar and went inside. Raven and Natasha were sitting at the table the group had the day before, Tavo and Daniel's favorite one. They had another woman sitting with them. Daniel whispered an awkward joke to Tavo about how it was the most girls the two had ever hung out with together. As they approached the table, Raven noticed them and waved. Natasha and her friend turned around, and Natasha's friend stood up to greet them. Natasha said hello to the two boys and introduced her friend as Erica. Erica shook both the boys' hands, and Tavo instinctively sat next to Raven. As he sat, they looked at each other and smiled, and Daniel smirked at them as he took a chair from a nearby table and took a seat at one end of the table everyone was sitting at. Lena popped out of the seemingly nowhere and greeted them all excited. She set glasses of red wine in front of Natasha and Erica, a glass of raspberry lemonade in front of Raven, a glass of iced tea in front of the two boys. Everyone thanked her and she told them to let her know if they wanted food. Tavo commented that Lena was always working, and she retorted by stating that you always have to have your best players in the game, and she walked off. Daniel got right to the point and asked Erica why they were all there and what they were going to do. He mentioned that he was told Natasha was something of an expert on El Cucuy, and no one seemed to know what part Erica played in all of this. Natasha explained that she had met Erica online, much like she had met them. She told them she had spent the last year or so studying some things that might be useful to them. She also mentioned that Erica was the one who had helped her with the cases of the shapeshifters and the vampire that she had told them about. Daniel shot forward in his seat, shocked. He asked Natasha to confirm that she had just said the words shapeshifters and vampire. Natasha did confirm and corrected herself by saying that shapeshifters probably wasn't the right word. Changers seemed more fitting. Daniel stared at her for a moment and then looked over at Tavo. Tavo shrugged, and Daniel told Natasha to remind him to ever explain what a changer is, and then he focused his attention on Erica. He asked her what exactly she had been studying that they may find useful. Erica spoke for the first time, and then replied, witchcraft. Daniel and Tavo sat back in their seats quickly from the shock of this revelation. Raven was unfazed and told the two boys to calm down. Then she asked Erica if she considered herself to be a witch. Erica confirmed that she did. Then Daniel asked her to confirm the term witch. He asked her if she meant like a Wiccan. She told the group that, as Natasha had mentioned, she had only been studying the craft for a little more than a year. She said that she quickly found that she was a natural at it. After doing some research into her family history, she learned why. She was from a bloodline of natural witches that could be tracked back further than she had been successful in doing so thus far. Therefore, no, she was not a Wiccan, as the Wiccan religion was founded in the 1960s, but a natural witch. Daniel and Tavo looked at each other, and Raven spoke up. She told the group that this was good information to hear, and she was more confident in believing that they might be able to do something knowing it. Tavo looked at her confused and asked why she felt that way. Raven looked back at him and replied that she was also a natural witch. She said that her bloodline could be traced back to Europe, but that it was in Mexico where her family planted their roots. She looked over at Erica and told her that she could feel energy as soon as the two had met. Erica replied that she could feel Raven's as well. Daniel made a snarky remark that Tavo had mentioned that his new girlfriend was a witch. Tavo instinctively replied defensively and stated that he didn't know and that she wasn't his girlfriend. He looked over at Raven, who had a slightly offended look on her face, to which Tavo commented that he would not be opposed to it, that she just wasn't. Raven's look changed to a bashful one as she smiled. Erica commented that she felt her energy as well, and pointed her finger at Raven and Tavo, respectively. Lena, as she often did, popped up out of nowhere and added that she did as well and was glad to see someone else finally said something. She asked the group if they needed anything, and Natasha suggested a big bowl of tortilla chips and some salsa, and the rest of the group agreed. Natasha also suggested a refill on everyone's beverages, as they might be there talking for a while. Lena nodded her head in acknowledgement and walked away. Daniel was beginning to lose his patience and spoke up. He recounted everyone's role in the group, listing himself as the brother, Tavo as the tech guy, Natasha as the scholar, and Raven and Erica as the witches. Then he asked the group to explain what they were going to do about El Cucuy coming after his sister. Natasha answered that she and Erica had spoken about what needed to be done, but that she wasn't sure that they had time to make it happen. Daniel snapped that he didn't care what it was, as long as they could save his sister. Lena returned with more drinks, and another server assisted by setting a huge bowl of tortilla chips and a large bowl of salsa down on the table. Lena set everyone's respective drinks in front of them, and the two servers walked away. Natasha asked Daniel to once again confirm that Teresa had first started seeing El Cucuy when her baby half-brother was born. Daniel concurred. Erica then asked him to confirm that it was around the same time that Teresa started to get in trouble at school. Daniel again concurred. Natasha then explained that she had a theory about El Cucuy that she didn't feel had been explored. She reminded the group that the traditional story of El Cucuy states that he comes for children who misbehave. Then she asked the group if they ever considered if it was the children's fault that he came after them. All but Erica looked at Natasha confused. Natasha further explained that most of the cases she had researched involving the children he suspected had been taken by El Cucuy, including Javier and Raven's sister, had evidence of abuse or neglect of those children. The group continued to look perplexed as Erica began to speak. She explained that it was possible the moral of the story of El Cucuy may have been misinterpreted all along. Parents had used the story to scare children into behaving properly, but she reminded the group as to why El Cucuy took the children in the first place. It was the guilt of him losing his own children that drove him to take children as he searched for the souls of his own. Erica asked hypothetically, what if El Cucuy isn't punishing the children for misbehaving, but rather punishing the parents for not appreciating their children for what they were? Tavo, Raven, and Daniel all sat back with apathetic looks on their faces. Could El Cucuy be coming for Teresa because her father and stepmother didn't treat her right? Daniel asked what they were supposed to do now that they knew why El Cucuy wanted his sister. He asked sarcastically if they were supposed to convince El Cucuy that his sister was not abused and was loved. Natasha replied to his remark by stating that in essence, that was exactly what they needed to do. Erica asked Daniel why he lived with his mother and Teresa lived with their father. Daniel seemed annoyed at the question, and they answered that it was because their father had insisted on the arrangement. He had actually heard an argument between them before the divorce where the father told their mother that she could have the boy, but he wouldn't let her take his little girl. Daniel added that his father was able to afford a better lawyer to make the arrangement happen. Daniel said that he always felt like his father just did it to be an asshole to his mother. His father had never really been very good to him or his little sister, and he feared it would eventually be the same for his little half-brother. He then asked hypothetically and aloud if he were safe because his mother and stepfather were good parents, or because he was older, and if El Cucuy was successful in taking Teresa, would he then come for Michael? Natasha asked Daniel if he felt his father could be talked into letting Teresa live with them at their mother's house. Daniel said that he doubted it. Whenever his father was challenged in any way when it came to Teresa, he would always put up a fight. He would insist that Teresa remain with him because it was what the court paperwork stated and she was just acting out. Erica asked about a temporary, short-term arrangement, just enough time for them to do some research on what else could be done. Daniel shook his head and stated that his mother was lucky to be able to get Teresa for a day visit most of the time, Overnights just did not ever happen much less short-term stays. Natasha and Erica looked at each other, then Natasha looked back at Daniel. I told him that she didn't think there was anything they could do to stop El Cucuy from taking Teresa. Daniel grew angry and shouted at her, asking what she meant. Other patrons in the bar looked over at the group. Lena shouted for everyone to mind their own business and shouted over at the group, asking if things were okay or if she could get them anything. Natasha shouted back they were fine for both questions. She looked back at Daniel and explained that she believed that El Cucuy was getting stronger. That was why he was able to get as close to Teresa last night, despite him sleeping on the floor and them all watching on the live stream. She explained that it was also why Teresa kept sleeping so soundly, though despite her recent fears of sleeping at night, El Cucuy was somehow wearing them down. Every time he came, he got closer and closer, learning sleep and shadow patterns until he inevitably got close enough to take her. Daniel asked Natasha to confirm that she was saying that El Cucuy was eventually going to take his sister, and there was nothing he could do. Natasha looked down at her wine and nodded her head yes. Erica spoke up now, stating that if El Cucuy was successful in taking Teresa, that they may still be able to save her from him. Daniel glared angrily at Erica and asked how. Natasha explained that in the cases she had studied, there was always a few days between the child disappearing, presumably being taken by El Cucuy, and the child's remains being found. She further explained that she had another theory for this time span. She again referred to the original story of El Cucuy, where it states that El Cucuy takes unruly children, mistaking them to be his own, who he is searching for. Natasha believed that El Cucuy spent a few days determining if a child was one of his every time he took one. After spending a few days with them and realizing they were not his, he would commit his most heinous acts. Raven spoke up to ask a question. She asked Natasha if she meant that she thought they would have time to find Teresa and get her back. Natasha confirmed that Raven was correct. Tavo then spoke and reminded the group that El Cucuy travels to the shadows. He asked how they were going to be able to find Teresa if he were to take her. Erica answered, "Because I know someone else who can travel through the shadows." That evening, Daniel took Teresa into bed. She asked him why he wasn't spending the night with her, and he told her that he was going to look for the monster which she'd been seeing in her room. He explained to her that he and some friends had a plan to make it stop bothering her. Teresa seemed uneasy, but thanked her brother for going after it. She expressed her fear that the monster might hurt him, and Daniel attempted to assure her that he would be fine. Daniel stood to leave the room, and as he started to close the bedroom door, Teresa cried out that she was scared. Daniel told her not to worry, that he'd still be watching over her. He exited the room and closed the door behind him. He walked through the house and said goodbye to his father and stepmother on the way out. When he got outside, Tavo and Raven were in Tavo's car waiting. Daniel got into the back seat and the three drove off. A short time later, they arrived at the address Erica had given them. As they were pulling up, there was a rideshare car sitting in front of the house. Natasha got out of the back of the rideshare car and leaned down to speak into the front passenger side window at the driver. She told the driver, "Thank you, John. I'll call you when I need a ride back to the hotel." The rideshare car pulled away, and Tavo pulled forward and parked next to the curb where it had been sitting. Natasha waited as Tavo, Raven, and Daniel got out of the car. She greeted them as the group turned toward the house. The front door opened and Erica stepped out and waved at them. The group made their way up the porch, and Erica invited them all in. She entered the house after all of them and closed the door behind her. Erica had a laptop set up on the coffee table in her living room. As the group gathered around the couch, Erica brought up the live stream of the camera they had set up in Teresa's room. Teresa appeared to be sleeping, but she tossed and turned frequently. As the group watched, Erica excused herself, explaining that she had to get supplies she had gathered. Tavo looked over at Daniel, his gaze fixated on the laptop screen. Erica returned to the room with a white candle a piece of rose quartz, a glass of water, and an incense stick. She arranged the objects on the coffee table in front of where she was going to sit as the group continued to watch the laptop screen. As Erica sat down, Daniel asked her if she would explain exactly what she was going to do and what the supplies were for. Erica explained that when El Cucuy showed up in Teresa's room, she was going to perform a ritual that would summon the one she had mentioned at the sports bar, the one who could travel through the shadows. Daniel replied that a few days earlier, he would have called her crazy, but now that he'd seen that El Cucuy really existed, he wasn't going to close his mind to the possibilities of what other things may be real. The group sat in Erica's living room, watching the live stream for quite some time, but nothing had happened. They didn't speak much, save for Erica occasionally offering her house guests refreshments. Daniel continued to watch the live stream with diligence. Several hours passed, and now Teresa appeared to be sleeping soundly, which Daniel felt unsettling. Tavo kept a close eye on his friend as well as the laptop. Suddenly, Daniel shouted, "He's there!" The group all focused their attention on the live stream as the closet door in Teresa's room slowly cracked open. Erica lit the incense and the candle. The closet door on the screen opened a little wider, and the long fingers of El Cucuy emerged from the darkness. Erica began to whisper to herself as the closet door opened wider. It all seemed to be happening so much faster without Daniel in the room with Teresa. The door opened wide, and the long face of the creature emerged from the closet, and immediately looked directly at the camera and grinned. Daniel jumped to his feet and shouted at Erica that she needed to speed up what she was doing. Erica seemed to ignore him, as she was focused on whatever she was whispering to herself. El Cucuy turned his gaze to Teresa and completely emerged from the closet. The creature stood the height of an average man, but its limbs were abnormally thin and grotesquely long, like its fingers and claws were. Its torso was thin and sickly in appearance. The beast took 2 steps, and it was at Teresa's bedside. She didn't stir at all as the creature leaned down and sniffed her, and then looked her over as if to inspect her. Daniel anxiously paced back and forth as he shouted at Erica to hurry. She continued to ignore him and appeared to be in a trance-like state. Tavo was fixated on the laptop screen and realized he was holding his breath. He gasped when he felt someone grab his arm. It was Raven. She squeezed his arm as they watched the creature place its hand on Teresa's forehead. The beast gently stroked Teresa's hair, and Daniel screamed at Erica to do something, but she kept her eyes closed and continued to chant. El Cucuy then placed his claws under the sleeping child and picked her up into his arms. He turned toward the camera and looked into it again. Then he looked down at Teresa and kissed her on the forehead. Daniel screamed incoherently as he watched his sister sleep helplessly in the arms of El Cucuy. The creature walked toward the closet and disappeared inside. Daniel screamed a mixture of pain and rage as he watched on the live stream. Then, almost as quickly as El Cucuy vanished into the closet, another figure appeared in a flash of flame. A man in a hoodie now stood in Teresa's room. The group all went silent as they watched what was now unfolding on the live stream. Erica continued to whisper, and the hooded man looked up toward the camera, just as El Cucuy had. The man raised his arm and held his hand toward the camera in a thumbs-up motion. Erica stopped whispering and opened her eyes. She came around the coffee table and repositioned herself so she could see the live stream on the laptop screen. She gave the hooded man a thumbs up in return as if he could see her, and blew a kiss toward the screen, as the rest of the group watched with different looks on their faces. The man in the hoodie then entered Teresa's closet. The flame set off the smoke detector in Teresa's room, and moments later Daniel's father could be seen on the live stream, opening the bedroom door in a rush. He waved his hand to clear the smoke from the air as he turned on the light. The group watched as Daniel's father noticed Teresa was not in her bed. He pulled the covers back and looked under the bed. He stood and rushed over the still open closet door and turned on the light. Daniel's stepmother entered the room, looking confused. The group watched as the couple seemed to argue on the live stream. Daniel's father walked over to the window and checked it to see that it was still locked. He turned back toward his wife and appeared to shout out something at her before he left the room. Daniel's stepmother looked around the room confused for a moment before she also exited the room. Tavo looked over at Daniel. He had sat down and was resting his face in his hands while mumbling to himself about how he should never have agreed to this and he should have stayed to protect her. Raven still had a firm grip on Tavo's arm, but had also turned her attention toward Daniel. Tavo turned toward Erica and Natasha asked what was next. Natasha, seemingly confused herself, looked at Erica. Erica replied that now all he could do was wait. She assured them that the man in the hoodie, who she called Liam, would be able to track El Cucuy through the shadows and give her word of his whereabouts. Once they located the creature's lair, they could plan a way to rescue Teresa before El Cucuy discovered that she was not one of his children. Daniel again stood and began shouting at Erica. He asked if the Vegas magician that appeared and disappeared in his sister's room was the one she called Liam. To his surprise, Erica confirmed that was indeed the name of the man in the hoodie. Then asked Erica who exactly Liam was, to which she replied, "He's my husband." Daniel asked how Liam was able to do the things he had seen on the live stream. Natasha spoke up and commented that El Cucuy wasn't the only supernatural thing in the world that was real. Erica then went on to explain that her husband had been murdered, and she had found a way to communicate with him through the Veil of Worlds. She explained that she had studied witchcraft to achieve this, and during her research, she had discovered that she had come from a bloodline of natural witches. It made things easy to learn as she honed her skills until the day she was able to reunite with her husband in this world. She explained that she could communicate with him at any time, but could only be with him physically 1 day a year. Raven interrupted her by stating, "Halloween." Erica nodded her head. Yes. Natasha interjected to explain that many things of a supernatural nature use the same means of travel and navigation through the Veil of Worlds. She explained that the reason many people fear proverbial things that go bump in the night is because darkness and shadow are some of the easiest means to navigate. Darkness and shadow exist everywhere, at once, regardless of day or night. Night often just adds additional coverage, camouflage, or occasional protection for the creatures and beings that exist in the hiding. Daniel interrupted and once again addressed Erica. He asked her to confirm that she was saying that her husband, Liam, was a ghost who was now tracking El Cucuy and his sister through the shadows like some kind of supernatural Boy Scout. Erica smiled and confirmed, though she added that Liam would prefer the term hunter, as he had gotten quite good at using the shadows to track people. Daniel asked how long it would be before Liam found El Cucuy. Erica assumed that since Liam was able to get to Teresa's room right after El Cucuy took her, that it shouldn't be long. Raven then spoke up again and asked about the pyrotechnics they had witnessed when Liam showed up on the live stream. Erica explained that the ritual she had used to establish contact with Liam through the veil involved a candle that she had gotten at the chapel where they were married. Raven looked around the room and noticed there were several candles all over the place. She asked Erica which candle it was. Just as she finished her question, the candle that sat alone on a small shelf lit by itself. Erica answered Raven's question by stating, "That one." Then she told the group, "He's found her." Erica stood up and walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a Ouija board. She set it on the coffee table by the candles she had set up to summon Liam and sat down. She set the planchette on the center of the board and asked Liam if he had found Teresa. The planchette then moved by itself and centered over the word, "Yes." Erica then asked Liam if he was at what he believed to be El Cucuy's lair. The planchette moved around in a circle and then again centered on the word, "Yes." Erica then asked if he could tell her where he was. The planchette began to move around the board as Erica wrote down what it spelled. The group watched anxiously as Erica scribbled out the message as fast as she could. When she was finished, she held out the paper for the group to see. It read, "Halloween Farm." A short time later, the group arrived at a farm on the outskirts of town. In between growing seasons, the farm was frequently used for food truck festivals, concerts, and car shows. During the month of October, the farm was known as the Farm of Fear because it was used for a haunted house and a haunted corn maze. The group were certain that it had to be the place that Liam had conveyed to them. They all got out of the car and began to survey the property as best they could in the darkness. The farmhouse could be seen off in the distance, but the only lights on were the exterior security and porch lights. Daniel anxiously asked what was next, as the group all turned to notice that Erica had separated herself from them and was standing with her hands held up, palms to the sky. Her eyes were open, but she seemed to stare off into the distance, once again in a trance-like state. She whispered to herself, as she had in the house earlier. Daniel paced like a caged tiger, but Tavo did his best to keep his friend collected while Erica did her thing. After a few moments, a ball of flame shot into the air off in the distance, near the structure that was used for the haunted house. Erica began walking in the direction of the beacon and said one word to the group. "There." Daniel ran to catch up with Erica, and the rest of the group followed quickly behind. Raven was the first to speak up about what they were going to do once they reached the location. Natasha explained that they would need to be careful and somehow sneak up on El Cucuy. She reminded them that not only could he cause serious harm to Teresa, but he could also escape into the shadows again. The group approached the old farmhouse structure quickly but quietly, with Erica at the point. From time to time, they could hear her whispering, presumably communicating with Liam. As they approached the structure, Erica signaled the group to stop and wait. She turned to them and told them that El Cucuy was inside, and Teresa was with him, and still sleeping. The structure was not sound. It was the actual old farmhouse the original property owners had lived in, but it had not been used in many years. The new farmhouse was on the other side of the property, and the current owners had allowed the old house to decay over time, so that it was more appropriate to use in their Halloween ventures. The old house is a single-story building and was missing walls and most of the roof, so inside was a relative term as most of the structure was vulnerable to the open air. Natasha suggested the group surround the structure and try to make visual contact with El Cucuy or Teresa. Once they actually knew where they were, they might be able to come up with a better plan to extract her. Erica mentioned that Liam was still hiding in the structure and maintaining watch over the creature. She said that he could aid them when the time came to make a move. The group all took out their phones and began a group video call. The plan was to carry their phones as a means of maintaining contact while separated, without having to necessarily say anything. The group then fanned out and began to surround the old farmhouse. Once they were all in position, they looked to their phones to check the video call. When they were all paying attention, Raven hand-signaled them to watch what she was about to show them. Then she turned her phone around to show from where she had positioned herself. She could see El Cucuy inside the house. They could all see from Raven's phone that the creature was sitting in the middle of one of the rooms, cradling Teresa in his lap. To the surprise of the group, El Cucuy appeared to be crying. He sat and stroked Teresa's hair while he wept. No one in the group seemed to be able to understand what they were watching. Then suddenly, things took a turn. The beast looked down at Teresa, and the look of sorrow changed to one of rage. The creature laid Teresa out flat on his lap and tilted his head to the sky. He opened his mouth wide and let out a blood-curdling howl. Then he aimed his wide-open mouth at Teresa and leaned down to take a bite. Daniel couldn't help but to yell "no" upon seeing this, and the cry alerted the creature that it was not alone with its prey. It stopped before biting and looked around, and then it began to sniff at the air. There was a little wind, so it immediately picked up Daniel's scent in the darkness, as it recognized it from smelling it in Teresa's room. Raven shouted into her phone at Daniel that El Cucuy was moving in his direction, and the rest of the group could see Daniel moving in response on the video call. As Raven lost sight of the creature, Natasha told the group she now had visual contact, and the beast was sniffing around where Daniel had previously taken a position, presumably trying to determine where he had gone. Daniel whispered in his phone that he went around the side of the structure, and he could now see where his sister was lying. He said he was going to make an attempt to get to her, but Natasha warned him not to move, as it appeared El Cucuy was also keeping an eye on Teresa, whilst he searched for him. As the creature stalked Daniel, Tavo alerted the group that he too could now see where it was currently positioned. He told the group that the beast was back inside the structure, and it looked to be sneaking up on one of the walls, which stood higher than the rest. Daniel alerted the group that the wall Tavo was referring to was the one he was currently hiding behind. Tavo glanced down at his phone and could see that Erica was moving, circling the structure. He asked what she was doing, but Erica didn't respond. She just kept circling around the structure. Tavo looked back up and could see El Cucuy sniffing around the wall that Daniel said he was on the other side of. Tavo asked Daniel if he was still there. Daniel confirmed that he was. Tavo urged his friend not to move or make any noise as the beast was right on the other side of the wall from him. Tavo saw El Cucuy smile a huge grin. He knew it had realized that it had found Daniel and it began to reach its long arms around the wall to grab him. Tavo couldn't help himself anymore. He stood and shouted, "Cucuy!" and began running toward the beast. The creature turned its attention to Tavo and let out a chilling growl. Daniel rose from his hiding place and ran a few steps, then stopped and turned when he realized that Tavo was now in danger as well. He shouted at the beast, and now El Cucuy found himself in between the two friends. The creature stood straight up and growled angrily at the sky, then it looked back and forth at the two as if deciding which one it wanted first. It quickly turned its attention back to Daniel as he took a few steps back. He stepped into a light from a flashlight. He turned and shielded his eyes from the light to hear a man's voice shout out, "What are you doing here?" The man lowered the flashlight to the ground, and when his vision readjusted, Daniel could see that it was the owner of the farm. His face was always on the billboards and posters for the various events the farm hosted, and he frequently appeared on the local news shows. The man again asked Daniel what he was doing on his property. Then he raised the flashlight and illuminated Tavo. El Cucuy was gone. The farmer asked the boys how many friends were there with him, but before anyone could answer, the farmer was suddenly tackled from the side with tremendous force. Tavo and Daniel looked over to see that El Cucuy had the farmer pinned against the wall of the structure. The farmer screamed as the creature dug its claws into his shoulder and thigh and bit deeply into the man's abdomen. Tavo turned his head to look away, and as he did, he could see that inside the structure, Natasha and Raven had used the distraction to retrieve the still sleeping Teresa, and they were now carrying her out. Suddenly, Tavo heard Erica shout at him and Daniel. The two looked over to see Erica standing a short distance away. She shouted at them to run away from the structure, to jump over the line of salt on the ground. Tavo and Daniel both looked down to see that Erica had laid a trail of salt on the ground that circled the structure. El Cucuy was still tearing apart and kicking and screaming farmer, as Erica again shouted at the boys to run. The two obliged, and as they reached the salt line, they each hopped over it. Tavo looked over to see Raven and Natasha approaching him from one side. They were being careful to remain on the same side of the salt circle. Natasha carried Teresa in her arms. Daniel and Erica quickly approached from the other side, and as they regrouped, they all noticed that El Cucuy had finished the farmer and had redirected his attention to them. The beast released an angry roar and leapt at the group as they jumped back in defensive terror. Erica stood her ground and watched El Cucuy slam forcefully into an invisible barrier when it reached the salt line. The creature was knocked back several feet by the impact of its own momentum and fell to its knees, stunned. Erica shouted, "Now, Liam!" and suddenly the line of salt on the ground lit up into a wall of flames. Through the flames, the group watched as El Cucuy regained his sense and realized what was happening around him. The creature writhed around and appeared to be terrified as it let out cries unlike any the group had ever heard. The circle of flames began moving, getting smaller around the structure, and El Cucuy began hopping from shadow to shadow trying to escape the circle. But he appeared to be trapped as the flames changed color from normal orange to an ominous pure white. As the flaming circle collapsed, El Cucuy stood in front of the group of friends on the opposite side of the flames and roared and snarled at them as if cursing at them. The beast took a few steps back as the flames closed in, and suddenly the man in the hoodie from the live stream walked out of the structure and directly up to El Cucuy. He stopped behind the beast and looked over toward Erica. She blew a kiss at the man. In an almost silly gesture, he reached up as if to catch her kiss in his hand and placed it in the pocket of his hoodie. Then Liam grabbed El Cucuy from behind, wrapping his arms around the creature's waist. El Cucuy flailed his long arms and legs, attempting to claw Liam off, but Liam would not release the creature. Liam then began to drag the beast toward the structure. El Cucuy continued to fight, but to no avail. Liam dragged the beast into the structure as a circle of white flames closed in and engulfed it. The creature's screams could be heard for miles as it burned inside. It wasn't long before sirens could be heard approaching. The flames had undoubtedly attracted attention from either a nearby property owner or the freeway, and someone had alerted authorities. The group watched the flames begin to recede as the firefighters began unloading their equipment. The screams of the beast had stopped, and before the firefighters even had time to set up their hoses, the flames extinguished themselves. The farm lit up with the flashing lights of more fire trucks, police vehicles, and ambulances. Paramedics began to look over the group as firefighters searched what was left of the structure. A firefighter called out that he found something. Then another firefighter called out that she had too. Police and fire crews converged on the structure and began hanging crime scene tape as the parents of Tavo, Daniel, Teresa, and Raven began to arrive on the scene. All were frantic to get to their children as police attempted to calm them down by assuring them that everyone was okay. The sun was beginning to rise as Teresa finally woke up in the back of an ambulance. She looked over to see Daniel sitting next to her, and she asked him what had happened. When the paramedics realized she was awake, they began to look over her again, as Daniel's parents and step-parents were all brought to the ambulance. Teresa explained to her family that she had no memory of anything that had happened that night after Daniel left, and she fell asleep. She told them that she didn't know where she was or how she had got there. She even seemed a little excited at the thought of being in an ambulance for the first time, and asked if she was going to get to go for a ride. Tavo, Raven, Natasha, and Erica all gradually gathered at the ambulance with Teresa's family. Natasha and Erica introduced themselves and explained to the parents of all the children that they were probably going to need to meet with them to fully explain things and to just spend time with their families for the time being. Raven introduced her parents to the entire group, referring to all as her friends. She introduced Tavo last, and to his surprise, she introduced him as her boyfriend. Tavo looked over at Daniel when she said it, and Daniel pumped his fist in approval. Another police vehicle arrived, and the two detectives that had responded when Tavo and his friends found the first boy's body got out and approached the group. Detective Cook immediately recognized everyone he met the first time and sarcastically commented about how their gatherings were becoming a regular thing. As Detective Cook spoke with the group, Detective Kim was led beyond the crime scene tape by a senior officer and the fire chief. They explained to them they had found two bodies burned inside the fire, one outside the structure and one inside it. They first showed him the body that was on the outside of the structure. It was lying up against the remaining wall, and it was obvious that the body had been torn apart prior to somehow only be singed by the blaze. It was also obvious who the corpse belonged to, as the recognizable beard from the billboards was still somewhat intact. Detective Kim asked aloud what could have torn the farmer apart in such a way, and the police officer snarkily replied that perhaps it was the other thing that they had found burned in the fire. The detective looked at the officer confused as the fire chief nodded his head in agreement and pointed to the inside of the structure. The three men carefully entered the structure, and Detective Kim immediately saw what the others were referring to, but he had no idea what he was looking at. Lying on its belly was a deformed and burnt corpse of El Cucuy. Its long arms and legs stretched out grotesquely in different directions. The abnormally long jaw was wide open, and unlike the corpse of the farmer, this one was burnt to a crisp. Detective Kim and the other men exited the structure and walked over to get his partner. As he did, the sun rose a little on the horizon, and one of the remaining walls of the structure slowly began to cast a shadow over the burnt corpse of El Cucuy. Detective Cook explained to the group that he may need to contact them over the next few weeks for further questioning as the case unfurled. He turned to Detective Kim and asked him about the two bodies. Detective Kim motioned for his partner to come with him. As the two walked away from the group, they explained that one of the bodies appeared to be Farmer Freddy. He then told his partner that he would have to see the other one for himself, because he didn't know what the hell it was. Intrigued, Detective Cook elected to see this mysterious corpse first. But as the two detectives entered the burnt structure, the corpse of El Cucuy was gone. Detective Kim assured his partner that it was just right there. The senior police officer and the fire chief that had shown the corpse to Detective Kim confirmed they had also seen it and looked around confused. Detective Cook walked over to where they all claimed the corpse had been lying and knelt down. In the dirt, he could see the outline of something that had been lying there. The entire outline of what had apparently been the corpse of a Cucuy was now completely covered in the shadow that the sun had made on the wall of the structure. Natasha arrived at the airport. As she got out of the rideshare car, the driver handed her suitcases. She told him, "Thank you so much, John. Next time I'm in town, I'll be sure to call you again." She turned to walk into the terminal. Just as she got inside, a man in a black suit approached her. He said, "Hello, Miss Blake. My employer would like to speak to you about your recent stay in town. He's willing to pay you handsomely." Travis Wolf was his nephew. The young boy laid in his bed, but he knew that he had to fight sleep again. He laid on his side with his covers pulled tightly to his face, but he left his eyes uncovered so that he could keep an eye and a watch on the closet door. He had tried to tell his mother that something was hiding in his closet, but she was always too busy getting high with her new boyfriend to care, and always just yelled at him to go back to bed. Before long, though, the boy began to lose his battle with sleep. As soon as the boy's eyes closed, the closet door opened, just a little, and a clawed hand with long, thin fingers emerged. Tavo was lucky to find help saving his best friend's little sister. Unfortunately, when the evil feeds off neglect, it may never run short of sustenance. Thanks again for listening. Support my podcast. And until next time, I'm sorry if I scared you.